Oh boy, I am in so much trouble today, but this is the podcast that I have been wanting to do for a couple of years, and we keep putting it off, finding reasons not to do it. Today is the day you are going to discover what I think are the very best parenting books ever written. Welcome to the Happy Families Podcast, real parenting solutions every day on Australia's most downloaded parenting podcast. We are Justin and Kylie Coulson.
I'm not sure how you think you're going to get through this list, but there's like 10 books on your bedside there.
It's on my desk. We're not recording this in bed. I can't believe you said bedside. I said to Kylie, we're going to do my favorite parenting books ever today. That's the plan. And Kylie said, okay, how many are you going to do? And I said, I'm tossing up between, like, we've only got sort of 10 or 12 minutes for the pod. I reckon 3 or 4, maybe 5. Kylie said, all right, go get them off the bookshelf so that you've got them so that we can look at them while you're talking about it. I walked in, I looked at the bookshelf. I brought in more than 3 or 4 or 5. I brought in 9. We're going to talk about them, but I promise they will change your life. I have a good friend. His name's Tim. He was telling me that some visitors came to his home one time and were looking at his bookshelf. They looked at him in surprise and said, why do you have so many parenting books on your shelf? You and Marianne are great parents.
Yeah, they're great parents because they read all those books.
That's kind of the point that he was trying to make. They were like, you don't need the books because you're a great parent. The books that I'm going to share with you today are the best parenting books that I can recommend. Now, I need to start by saying I will not be recommending my own books. I'm talking about other people's books. It's just too self-serving. It's too self-congratulatory.
And I haven't read any of them.
That's because
I'm sleeping with the parenting book.
Thank you so much. I had a feeling you were going to go there. I do want to mention, though, my book, The Parenting Revolution. The reason I'm recommending it or suggesting it at the outset before I get into my top 10 books, and I am going to share 10 of them, is because the world's most referenced, the world's most cited living psychology professor, Professor Richard Ryan from the University of Rochester, and that man recommends my parenting book to people when they ask him for an accessible parenting book that really gets to the core of what great parenting is about. So it's a pretty hefty endorsement. He's told me that he'll endorse my next book about boys when it comes out because he really appreciates what I'm saying. I'm just putting it out there. The Parenting Revolution, if you haven't downloaded it or grabbed hold of it yet, it will make a difference in your life. I know it. But Kylie, let's hit this. Let's go.
So I'm just letting you know, I'm going to keep you to time.
Okay, it's 1 minute per book.
You have 1 minute.
Okay, but I want to make sure that we really emphasize the goodness of these books. First book I'm starting with. By the way, these are not in any particular order. Well, they kind of are, but not quite. First book that I'm starting with is called Between Parent and Child.
Oh, I did read that one.
Right. So my friend and mentor, in fact, the reason that I know the man is because of this book. My friend and mentor, Professor H. Wallace Goddard, teamed up with the widow of the original author of the book. Her name was Alice Ginnott. His name was Chaim Ginnott. The book is called Between Parent and Child. It is a pioneering guide to emotionally intelligent parenting. It's a little bit dated. Some of the examples feel a bit old, but the principles are timeless. And while the dialogue feels a little bit clunky, the things that you will learn from this book, if there was only one parenting book that I could recommend outside of my own, it would be this one. I believe that it is probably the best parenting book ever written. Between Parent and Child by Dr. Chaim Ginnott. That's HaimGinott. We'll link to all of these in the show notes.
Raising an Emotionally Intelligent Child. Why is that on your list? This
one is by John Gottman. He is widely recognized as the world's foremost expert on relationships.
Yeah, so he does like the 7
steps to transform your marriage, that kind of stuff. And his marriage books are incredible. By the way, if you're struggling
the 4 henchmen or something.
Yeah, the 4, what is it? The 4 horsemen of the apocalypse.
Yeah.
The guy is incredible. This book is really accessible. And this was like the forerunner of all of the future emotional intelligence boom that happened through the sort of early to mid 2000s through the 2010s. It's beautifully written and it gets to the heart of parenting. John Gottman, Raising an Emotionally Intelligent Child. It is without question one of the very, very best parenting books that you will ever come across, and I just can't recommend it enough.
The Emotional Lives of Teenagers by Lisa D'Amour.
Dr. Lisa D'Amour.
We've had her on the podcast.
We've had her on the podcast. I've done some Instagram lives with her. For me, as somebody who is, as you said, the walking, talking parenting book, I actually don't read a lot of parenting books. I usually pick them up, read 30, 40, 50 pages and just think, I'm not going to get anything out of this one. I know more. I would explain it differently or whatever. And I'm not saying that in a prideful way. It's just like, if I'm going to spend my time in a book, I want to be learning from it. I don't want to either have what I know rehashed, sometimes worse. I want to learn. Dr. Lisa D'Amour is one of the only people on the planet who is positioned as a parenting expert that I don't want to miss what she has to say. She is so wise. She is so compassionate. I think that she's absolutely inspired in the way that she writes.
So if you're not a huge reader, would you pick it up?
Yes, it's amazingly accessible. Interesting factoid, Dr. Lisa D'Amour was one of the key experts that guided the development of Inside Out 2, the Disney Pixar movie. So
that's such a good movie.
If you watch that and think that they've really nailed what's going on emotionally for both parents and children, it's because of her input. She's beyond world class. She's, I would say, at Brené Brown level. And like, there's not much further that you can go in that public speaking. Let's talk about helping people understand what's going on in their lives. She's at that level. I think that she is as good as... I still don't agree with everything she says, by the way, because I come from a different philosophical and academic background. But we agree on way more than we disagree. And she's just outstanding. So those are the first three that I'd recommend. Hey, we've got to take a break. We're taking too long on this. It was the intro. We spent too long on the intro. After the break, we'll get through as many more as we can, as quickly as we can. Okay, we are talking about the very best parenting books that I could possibly recommend if you want to upskill yourself in parenting. We've only done 3 of the 10 that I reckon I'm going to get through. Let's do the next one.
Act Natural by Jennifer, I'm going to say Traig.
Yeah, Jennifer Traig wrote this book. It's the subtitle is A Cultural History of Misadventures in Parenting. This book was so brilliant. It's essentially, I'd call it a narrative historical look at all the mistakes and all the trends and all the cultural baggage that goes along with why we parent the way that we do. So it goes back a couple of thousand years and what people were saying about parenting then. And it just it traces all of the awful. It's actually a brutal and terrible book in some ways, but it's also incredible. And she writes with this really... I don't know how I'd say it. She's got so much attitude when she writes. She's really irreverent. She's just, it's not mockery. She's way too smart for that. But it's a really acerbic wit. It's funny the whole way through as she traces the absolute mess that we've made of parenting over the centuries. I loved this book. If you have a look at all the dog-eared pages on this,
I can see.
I couldn't put it down. I think I read it in about 2 days. I just absolutely absorbed it. It was brilliant. It's called Act Natural, A Cultural History of Misadventures in Parenting, and I loved it.
Okay, so this one, I'm going to try and remember. Michaeline Duclef?
Yeah, that's right.
Hunt, Gather, Parent.
This book got routinely panned online. The reviews, people are scathing. I learnt so much from it. It's essentially this NPR USA journalist goes into 3 different cultures. She visits a Mayan village in the Yucatan Peninsula. She visits Inuit families above the Arctic Circle and some Hadzabe tribes in Tanzania, and essentially looks at the way they're parenting and compares it to what we do in our Western cultures.
So why is everyone up in arms about it?
Oh, because some of it's really patronising, and because she's a journalist that has a 2-year-old, and so she's kind of positioning herself as this anthropology/parenting expert, and she kind of gets a few things wrong. And in the book, I got frustrated with her quite a few times, but it's an absolutely delightful read, and she gets more right than she gets wrong. It's consistent with some of the very best science. Her writing is so compelling, and I just loved it. I genuinely loved Hunt, Gather, Parent by Michaeline Duclef. Thought it was brilliant.
All right, I think we're running out of time, so
Yes,
you're
we
going
are.
to do this super, super quick. But anyone who's been listening for a long time knows that Alfie Kohn is literally hands down one of your favourite authors. You've got 2 books in front of me here, The Myth of the Spoiled Child and Unconditional Parenting.
I was going to bring a couple more of his in as well, but I knew that you'd get mad at me. Alfie Kohn is one of the central reasons that I do what I do. I was struggling as a dad. I was struggling as a father. I had a radio career. I had no idea what I was doing. I picked up his book, Punished by Rewards, because it was referenced in a book that I was reading about leadership. When I read it, it completely changed my life, our life, and the lives of millions of people around the world. Because as a result of Punished by Rewards, I went back to school and studied psychology and now do what I do. It was literally that book that made that happen.
So I really struggle to read his words. Like I really struggle reading.
He writes big words. Sometimes he's not particularly accessible.
But I love listening to him.
And we've had him on the podcast a couple of times.
He is so compelling when you actually hear him. Like he's so animated and just like is so passionate about this.
But he speaks so vividly.
Yeah.
So great. So I wanted to talk about Punished by Rewards, but I've actually selected 2 others. I think that they're better. The Myth of the Spoiled Child just challenges conventional wisdom about children and parenting generally. It's such a great book.
Well, I would suggest that most parents at some point have been told if you hold your baby too much or you cuddle them too much, you're going to spoil them and they're going to grow up. And
and he argues against all of that and says, no. We're supposed to be our children's champions.
Yeah.
The other book that I've picked is what I think might be, I mentioned before that Between Parent and Child is probably the best parenting book ever written. Unconditional Parenting. Unconditional Parenting would be in my top 3. I might go so far as to say it's the second best book on parenting that I've ever read. Love Unconditional Parenting.
Well, we have 2 left.
No, we don't. I couldn't fit them all in. I couldn't carry them all into the office. There's a couple more that I have to mention as well. But let's do these 2 and then I'll do a couple of honourable mentions.
You are not. You are not.
I can't help myself.
The second last one, The Secrets of Happy Families.
This is by a guy called Bruce Feiler. He's a New York Times bestselling author. I love what Bruce writes. He's just compelling. He's basically written a new playbook for families. He talks about Warren Buffett's guide to setting an allowance, how to have difficult conversations, the Green Berets rules for family reunions. There are lessons from the sex mum. He basically interviews a whole lot of people who do a whole lot of things in their families differently to what we're used to seeing and says, this is how you create a happy family. I loved it. It was compelling. It was fun. It was interesting. It was provocative. Couldn't get enough of it.
Lucky last. Do you hear me? Last. It's the last book we're talking about today. It's called The Teenage Brain. It's a neuroscientist's survival guide to raising adolescents and young adults. Frances Jensen.
Before I talk about Frances Jensen's The Teenage Brain, I have to give a huge mention to The Anxious Generation by Jonathan Haidt, which came out last year.
You are so naughty.
And I've also got to talk about Faber and Maslish and their incredible book, How to Talk So Kids Will Listen and Listen So Kids Will Talk. Okay?
I read that one.
It's brilliant. It's probably my top 5 as well. I got a couple of extras in there. Did you like how I did that? This is the last one. The Teenage Brain, Frances Jensen. So Frances Jensen is probably one of the world's leading neurologists. She's at the University of Pennsylvania. She knows brains better than pretty much anyone on the planet. And this is a book about what's going on in your teenager's brain. It's fascinating. It's well written. It's quite compelling. And it's an important book for people who want to understand neurology, neuropsychology, neuropsychiatry. It's accessible though. Like you can really read it and get into it. And I recommend it if you're raising bigger kids. That is
extensive.
Yeah. And I didn't bring in things like The Whole Brain Child.
Stop.
You're not going to let me finish, are you? We need to wrap it up there. All of those books will be in the show notes. I pity poor old Mim who has to write all of that out for us. We will link to those books in case you want to grab some for your bookshelf. Like I said at the start of the pod, they will make you a better parent. Anything else from you? Give me one. What's your favourite parenting book?
Well, I'm going in a totally different train of thought here, but my absolute, hands down, favourite parenting book of all time, drum roll, is I'll Do Better Tomorrow by Maureen Adamek.
Technically, it's called I'll Do Better Tomorrow, I Promise.
It is.
And I can't believe I didn't think of
You're
that.
speechless, aren't you?
It's such a beautiful book. It makes me cry every time I read it. Oh, my goodness. And it's a kid's book. It's a kid's book.
You can read it every night.
And cry every night.
From cover to cover. And my second.
Oh, you're going to go with another one. Right. So you give me a hard time. We're out of time. And now what's your second one?
My second is Guess How Much I Love You by Sam McBratney.
Oh, gosh, you're good.
When I think about the kind of parent that I aspire to,
my heart is
those two books, hands down, have had the most influence in my life.
And you know what? They'll probably teach you to be a better parent than all the books that I've just gone through. Gosh, that's so good. I'm so glad you said that. I hope you've really enjoyed today's podcast. A bit longer than it should have been. Oh, gosh, but we really, really care about you and your family and helping your family be happier. And we reckon these are the resources that'll help you to get there. The Happy Families podcast is produced by Justin Coulson from Bridge Media. If you'd like more info about making your family happier, look at those books, have a look at the show notes, grab a couple of them and read them. Otherwise, we've got a whole bunch of resources for you at happyfamilies.com.au.